This is DRF, Race of the Day.
Everybody, Mike Beer here with Thursday's DRF Race of the Day. The Race of the Day is at Belmont Park for Thursday. Race number 8 is a turf sprint, 4 allowance horses, full field here. Let's put the field up there right now. 12 entered, 10 for the turf. Note that number 3, Gandy Dancing, number 6, Risk Profile are entered for main track only. So still a big field though if we're on the turf. Quick reminder before we get into it that you can download free Formulator past performances for the Race of the Day on the Race of the Day event page at drf.com. This is actually a pretty wide open and competitive field. I do think you're going to have a likely favorite down towards the inside of the number 1 Perfect Munnings off of a win on the dirt at Saratoga last time for Todd Pletcher. This horse was a debut winner on the grass to kick off his career at the end of last year, November 29th, over at Aqueduct, going this 6 furlong distance. He was good that day. He came right back to win a stakes race on the dirt. He's not been on turf since that debut, but he returned from that pretty long layoff last time at Saratoga and certainly looked no worse for the wear, running the best race of his career to win on the dirt at 7 furlongs. He was first-time Lasix that day. He's a very interesting horse here because I don't necessarily feel like he's one that you have to take a short price on in here. I do think he's going to run well and perhaps be the horse to beat in here. But he also feels like he could get over bet, so it's a little bit of a tough situation as far as making picks and perhaps betting the race goes. We'll see how it all plays out. Let's start off with the Timeform US Pace Projector before we get into some of the other contenders. You can see there that they are projecting a fast pace in this race. We'll see how that plays out. I suppose it could get fast in here. There are a couple of horses towards the outside with speed. The number 8, Montauk Daddy, is the horse that they project to be out there on the early lead, and certainly Montauk Daddy. He's a horse who has a license to win this race if he can somehow shake free on the early lead. He's been racing in some cheaper races throughout the summer, starter allowances, a couple of claiming races, restricted claiming races at that. But he's run well on dirt. He's run well on turf. He won at Saratoga. They dropped him in class, second off of a short layoff at Saratoga. He got rained off the turf that day, went right to the front, easy win with an 85 buyer, came back a week later on the turf going 5.5 furlongs, and it was just sort of the same thing against starter allowance rivals. Right to the top in there. He was the best speed of that race. It wasn't the strongest field in the world, and he wired him with an 83. Pretty good performance there. He came back in a tougher race last time over at Monmouth Park, and it just was no match for a pretty good horse named Charmed, who has, as a matter of fact, a race in common with several of the contenders in here. Charmed does. He also ran at Saratoga and got tired on the lead to finish behind several of these horses that are back in this race. So Montauk Daddy, he's taken a step up in class here. He does have speed for a very good trainer. He's got some figures that say he could contend here. He'll probably be a pretty fair price in the race if he was one that you liked. I personally, wasn't thrilled with him, but he's a contender, as is a horse, drawn towards the outside. Shiraz, who, he's just very consistent, wins very infrequently, but Shiraz, is a pretty hard-hitting 7-year-old. He's in good form right now. He tends to show up 2 starts back at Saratoga. He was in that race that Charmed was in. Big Package was your winner that day. Christopher, who's back in here, was second. Colton's Command, who was also back in here, was third. Shiraz, very uncharacteristically for him, did not run a good race that day. He didn't get out of the gate that well. He was on the outside, chasing the pace all the way, and just failed to fire. Actually wound up finishing last, but he bounced back with a better performance at Kentucky Downs last time, going 6.5. His typical sort of, third place finish, 89 buyer. He's very consistent overall. To me, he's a hard horse to take on the win end just because he wins so infrequently, but you can usually rely on him to show up, and if he gets a good trip in here, he's supposed to be, at least some kind of a factor in the race. But let's go back to the Perfect Munnings just to kick things off here, because I do think in a lot of ways he's the horse to beat. The replay that we're going to show you is that most recent start that we were talking about in the Open there. He came off of a layoff here up at Saratoga. This is a 7 furlong dirt race. He's just much the best in here. He's had a really good trip in a race where you're going to see through the stretch. There's no closing going on. The horse that he outruns through the final 1/8 of a mile here, Blue Gator, was on the lead. Perfect Munnings overtook him with very little trouble. Drove clear at the end. Nobody closing through the stretch there, as you can see. But horse ran well, took a nice step forward for trainer Todd Pletcher, who started off this Belmont fall meet on a really good run. His horses have been very live here. And again, this is a horse that, when we just go back to his career debut, the only time he ever ran on turf, he ran a very nice race that day. He's just got great tactical speed. He has enough pace to get forward, but then he doesn't need to be on the lead. He likes to sit, do some stalking. He runs through the stretch. He's a very, sort of logical horse in this race. We'll see what kind of price You can get on him. We talked about that sort of common race that several of these horses have back on October 28th at Saratoga. We'll look at the replay of that right now because Christopher, the number 5 in this race, actually runs a very good second in here with an 85 buyer. He's a horse who had his prior start, when they finally cut him back to sprint on turf for the first time, he ran a very good race that day. Came from last into a good pace, to be sure, but one going away in there is much the best with a new top buyer. He came right back in this race that we were watching there. And ran really well again, closer to the pace in that spot. Made his way to a short lead there. You saw past the 8th pole. The whole pack was chasing him, but he stayed gamely. Only got caught at the end by Big Package, who was the favorite. Good second to him. That was Colton's Command, who finished 3rd. Colton Command is the number 4 in this race. I thought he ran okay in that race too, and maybe a horse that you want to give one more chance. So I want to see what kind of price Colton's Command goes off at before I decide whether to use him or not. But I do think he's a contender. This is a horse, Colton's Command, who was very impressive winning his career debut, going a mile at Gulfstream. Didn't run quite as well in his next 2 starts up here at Belmont Park, but they were pretty strong allowance races he was in. And when Belmont cut him back at Saratoga 2 starts ago, back on July 28th, he got very unlucky that day. It's hard to say that he was necessarily going to win that race, but he got caught in all kinds of traffic through the stretch. He was totally blocked, did not get to run. So that made him very interesting, I thought, in that last race, the August 28th race up at Saratoga. And, he didn't have as much trouble that day, but he was once again last on the rail. Joel Rosario elected to stay in and try to come up the inside there through the stretch. He didn't get stopped, but it was pretty tight for him. Maybe that dulled his run a little bit at the end. He wound up getting up for, I thought, a pretty good 3rd in that race. I have no problem with the race that he ran that day. I could use him again, but I do want to see what kind of price he goes off at. At the end of the day, there's probably not that much between he and Christopher, and they may not be that close in price. So I want to see how they decide to bet the race before I use either one of them. The other horse who I suppose could pull some interest here is the number 10 Digital Future. He's another 3-year-old in the field, trained by Chad Brown. I don't know. This horse was 2 races earlier this year when they switched him over to turf. He was second both times, and a pretty close second both times after having the lead in the stretch in each of those races and just getting run down. I didn't really see his excuses to not win either of those. He did come back at Saratoga last time. We'll take a look at that race right now. This is August 25th. A little bit of a layup here. He was off for about 2 months coming into this race. Got a very good trip in the clear as the favorite. Driving right there with every chance at the top of the stretch. And he's going to gamely prevail at the end. He improved, I guess, slightly to win. I feel like this is another race where he has to prove and improve again if he's going to win here. I guess that's not out of the question, but he would have to be a pretty big price, for me to want to take a shot with him in here. I'm still not totally sure that this horse is actually that good, and I think he has taken a pretty significant step up in class here. So I didn't really want him. The other horses that, I really thought the other horses were pretty hard to get to buy, although I will just mention one long shot in the race, so I think I'm going to try to get in there. That's number 2, Rejected Again, who was claimed for $25,000 3 starts back out of a turf race. This is a horse who's a maiden on the grass. He's 0 for 5 on the grass. But all of those turf starts are going longer, and when you start taking, he's actually run well in a couple of those too. He seems to run his figures on turf, so I don't think you could say he's not a turf horse, even though he hasn't won on the surface. I just feel like when you start taking his form apart, he just feels like a horse who's better sprinting, and he's never sprinted on the grass. So this will be the first time. Leah Giamatti, who claimed him 3 starts back, has run him back twice on the dirt at Saratoga. He ran well in both of those races. Didn't win either one, but he ran well in those races, especially the last one in an allowance race that was won by Baby Yoda with a 114 buyer. Obviously, this horse had no chance in there. But he's, run pretty well. I think he's better sprinting than he is routing, and this will be his first turf sprint. And he just feels like a horse who could be a price in here with some speed. In some ways, if I could go over and do it again, I might have put him on top just to take a shot with him, because I'm not sure that the horse that I ultimately picked, and we can put the picks up there now, I also ultimately put Perfect Munnings on top in here. And I do think he's going to run well, and it's probably the horse to beat in some ways. But, he may not be that much of a price in this race. So I did go Perfect Munnings over Colton's Command. I threw Rejected Again in there at a price, and if he's a really big price, and Perfect Munnings winds up getting way over bet in here, I could see throwing a few bucks on Rejected Again and just seeing what happens here, because I thought he was sort of the interesting other horse in the race, whether he winds up winning or not. But that's how I looked at the race anyway. I went 1, 4, and 2 in the Thursday race of the day. It's the 8th race at Belmont Park. The approximate post time, 5:47 Eastern Time. Good luck.